It was late in the evening, the kind of time when the streets begin to quiet down and the last customers hurry home before the night grows colder. The small restaurant on the corner had just closed for the day. Warm lights glowed inside, but the chairs were already stacked, and the floor had been swept clean. Outside, the owner stood by the doorway, stretching his tired back after a long shift. He had been on his feet since morning, serving customers, cleaning dishes, and dealing with the usual everyday problems that came with running a small place in a busy part of town. He looked down the street, hoping the night would stay calm. He liked this moment, the short break between closing time and going home. It gave him a chance to breathe before starting everything again the next day. But that night, something different. Happened, something he never expected, something that would stay in his mind for years. A small figure approached slowly from the far end of the street. At first, he didn't pay much attention. People often passed by at night, some wandering home, some looking for a bus, some just walking with no clear direction. But as she came closer, he noticed she was not like the others. She looked young, maybe in her late teens, but life had clearly been heavy on her shoulders. Her clothes were worn, the fabric faded and frayed, and she carried an old trumpet case that had definitely seen better days. It was scratched, dented, at the corners, and held together with tape in a few places. The owner's first thought was that she might ask for money. It happened sometimes, someone walking by, desperate and tired, hoping for a little help. He didn't mind helping when he could, but business had been slow recently, and he, too, was carrying his own worries. Still, when she stopped in front of him, he didn't turn away. There was something gentle about her, something that made him pause. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering courage. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft and polite. "Sir, can I ask something?" He nodded. "Sure. What is it?" She held her trumpet case a little tighter. "I was wondering if I could play a song for you. Just one song. If you like it, maybe I could have a meal? I haven't eaten since morning." The owner blinked. It wasn't the question he expected. People asked for coins or food or sometimes work. But an offer to play a song? That was new. For a second, he didn't know what to say. She waited quietly, her eyes lowered, almost as if she didn't want to see his reaction. Maybe she thought he would laugh. Maybe she had heard too many harsh replies before. He let out a small chuckle, not because he wanted to hurt her feelings, but because the situation felt so unusual. A trumpet performance in exchange for dinner? It sounded like something from another time, another world. "You want to play a song?" he asked, still trying to understand. "If you don't mind," she whispered. "I don't want to cause trouble. I don't have money right now, but I can play. And if you don't like it, it's okay. I'll leave." Her voice wavered, but she held her trumpet case steady. She clearly wasn't joking. She meant every word. The owner looked at her again, this time more carefully. Her face looked tired, but her eyes held something sincere, something honest. She didn't look like someone trying to trick him. She looked like someone who had been through too much and still held on to a small piece of hope. He sighed softly. "You know," he said, "I'm not a music expert." She nodded quickly. "I know, but I can try. I just really need a meal." Her words were simple, but they hit him in a place he didn't expect. He thought about all the times he had given food to someone in need. Those moments always reminded him of his own life long ago, when things were much harder. Maybe that softness inside him was why this girl chose to approach him instead of someone else. He rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them in the cool evening air. "All right," he said finally. "If you want to play, you can play. I don't promise I'll understand the song, but I'll listen." When she looked up at him, her expression changed completely. For the first time, A faint smile appeared, small but real. She nodded gratefully, as though he had given her far more than just permission. "Thank you," she said quietly. The owner stepped aside to give her space near the entrance. The street around them was calm, just a few people passing by, and the dim streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. She lowered herself to the step beside the restaurant door and gently placed the trumpet case on her lap. He watched her open the case. Inside, the trumpet wasn't shiny or new. The brass was dull, the surface scratched, and one of the valves looked slightly crooked. Still, she handled it with great care, as if it was something precious. Maybe it was the only thing she owned that still connected her to a better time. She took a deep breath before picking up the trumpet. She checked the mouthpiece, wiped it with her sleeve, and adjusted the valves. Her movements were practiced, sure, and the owner began to wonder how long she had been playing. A couple walking by slowed down, curious. Someone across the street paused, as if wondering what was about to happen, but the girl didn't notice. She was focused on her trumpet, like the world around her had faded away. The owner leaned against the doorway, arms crossed gently, waiting. Before playing, she glanced up at him once more. "If the sound is too loud, please tell me," she said shyly. "I don't want to disturb anyone." "It's all right," he replied. "Just play." She raised the trumpet to her lips. For a moment, the street went silent, as if holding its breath. Even the owner felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. He didn't know why, but something told him this moment was important. Then she played the first note dot. It wasn't loud or harsh. It wasn't shaky. The sound came out smooth and warm, filling the quiet street with a richness that didn't match the old, worn instrument in her hands. The owner straightened without even realizing it. The couple walking by stopped completely, and the person across the street slowly stepped closer. The girl closed her eyes as she played, letting her breath guide each sound. There was emotion. In her music, real emotion, the kind that doesn't come from lessons alone. It came from living through hard days, from carrying a story that few people cared to hear. The owner felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a street performance. This was a voice speaking through a trumpet. She played with a depth he never expected. Each note carried something soft but powerful, something hopeful yet aching. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently, pressing the valves with the ease of someone who had practiced thousands of times. The street seemed to transform around her. What had been a quiet, cold evening suddenly felt warm and alive. People passing by began to gather. Some stopped out of curiosity, others because the music pulled them like a magnet. The owner looked around and noticed how the sound wrapped around everyone, drawing them into one shared moment. But more than that, he watched her. The way she leaned into each note, the way she breathed with the rhythm. She didn't just play the trumpet, she lived inside the music. He remembered his initial chuckle and felt a little embarrassed. He had doubted her, not because he wanted to, but because the world usually taught him to. People didn't walk up offering to play a trumpet for dinner. It sounded too strange to be real. But here she was, proving him wrong with every note. The song grew fuller, richer. The street felt as if it belonged to her alone. Even cars passing by slowed down, their drivers glancing out the windows to catch a piece of the melody floating in the air. The owner didn't expect to feel anything, but he did. Her music touched something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it reminded him of his childhood, when he used to sit with his father near the radio, listening to old songs after dinner. Maybe it reminded him of how far he had come, how life was always unpredictable, and all of this started because a hungry girl asked if she could play in exchange for a warm meal. As she continued, he wondered what her story was. Who taught her to play? Where she slept at night? How long she had been carrying that old trumpet around? But he didn't ask. Not yet. He just listened. When she finished the final note, the sound faded slowly into the night. For a moment, no one moved. Even she kept her eyes closed, as if holding on to the last moment of the song. Then she lowered the trumpet gently onto her lap and took a quiet breath. A small clap echoed from somewhere in the small crowd that had formed. Then another. Soon there was warm applause surrounding her, soft voices praising her talent, strangers nodding at her with respect. She opened her eyes, surprised by the attention. Maybe she wasn't used to applause. Maybe she had spent too many days playing for empty streets. The owner stepped forward, still stunned. He didn't say anything immediately because he couldn't find the right words. All he knew was that he no longer saw her as a stranger with an old trumpet. He saw her as someone extraordinary. And without waiting for her to ask again, he said softly, "Come inside. You're getting your meal." That was how it all began. One simple question, one tired evening, and one unexpected moment that would change much more than just the rest of the night. The cold evening air seemed to soften after the girl finished playing, as if her music had warmed the street in a quiet, gentle way. People who had stopped to listen slowly continued on their way, still talking about her performance. A few glanced back at her with respect, amazed that someone who looked so tired could play with such heart. The restaurant owner opened the door and motioned for her to come inside. She hesitated for a moment, almost afraid to step in, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. But he gave a small nod, and she finally took a step forward, holding the trumpet carefully with both hands. Inside, the restaurant felt cozy. The lights were warm, the chairs were still stacked, and the smell of cooked food hung in the air. It was the kind of place that felt safe after a long day outside. She looked around quietly, taking in everything as if she wasn't used to being in a space like this anymore. "Sit anywhere," the owner said gently. She nodded and chose a seat near the counter, placing her trumpet case on the floor beside her. She didn't open her mouth to speak. She looked nervous, like someone who had learned to stay quiet to avoid bothering anyone. The owner went into the kitchen to warm up a plate of food. As he worked, he couldn't help thinking about the performance he had just heard. He replayed the notes in his mind, that warm, soulful sound from an instrument that looked like it belonged in a museum of forgotten things. How could she play so well? How long had she been practicing? And why was she out there alone? When he returned with the plate, she looked up quickly, as if surprised he actually brought her food, even though he had promised. He placed the dish in front of her and stepped back a little, letting her eat in peace. "Thank you," she whispered. The owner nodded. "You earned it." She gave a faint smile, but didn't say anything else. She picked up the fork and began eating slowly at first, almost carefully, like she didn't want to look greedy. But after the first few bites, the hunger showed. She ate with quiet focus, as if she had been hungry for much longer than she said. It made the owner's chest tighten a little. He didn't want to pry. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But he also didn't want her to leave without knowing she had someone willing to listen. After a few minutes, when she seemed more settled, he sat down across from her. The restaurant was empty, the streets outside quiet again. It felt like the right time to talk. "You play well," he said. She paused, swallowing a bite before answering. "Thank you. Where did you learn?" She looked down at her plate. "A long time ago. Someone taught me." He waited, hoping she would explain more. She didn't. Instead, she took another bite and avoided his eyes. He didn't push. He understood the look she had, the look of someone who had learned the hard way that telling your story wasn't always safe. The world didn't always listen with kindness. Still, he couldn't ignore what he had heard outside. "You know," he said softly, "that music of yours? It stopped people. Not many things do that anymore." She paused again. The owner noticed her fingers, the way they rested on the edge of the table, slightly trembling but not from cold. They looked like fingers that had practiced for countless hours, pressing metal valves over and over. "I'm glad they listened," she finally said. "Sometimes people walk past like I'm not there." The owner nodded. Tonight, they didn't. A quiet moment passed between them. She kept eating, slower now, tasting each bite as though she didn't know when she'd have another meal like this. Outside the restaurant window, the streetlights flickered softly. The world seemed peaceful in that small moment. The owner leaned back slightly. "Do you play every day?" "Mostly," she replied. "Not always in this area. I move around to different streets." She nodded. "Different places. Sometimes people tell me to leave. Sometimes they don't care. Sometimes they listen." "And do you always play for food?" he asked gently. Her eyes lowered again. "Sometimes food. Sometimes a coin or two. I try not to ask people too much. I just play and hope someone hears me." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. The owner felt something inside him shift against something protective, something quietly angry at how young she was and how hard her life seemed to be. He cleared his throat. "You can eat here," he said. "You don't have to ask every time. If you're around and you're hungry, just come by." She froze for a second. Her eyes lifted slightly, unsure whether he meant it or if he was just being polite. "I don't want to take advantage," she whispered. "You're not," he replied. "I'm saying it because you deserve a warm meal, especially with that kind of talent." Her lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't a full smile, but it was more than he had seen before. "Thank you," she said softly. She finished her meal slowly, savoring every bite. When the plate was empty, she placed her fork neatly on the side as if she wanted to show respect for the food she had received. The owner stood up and took the empty plate. "Do you need anything else?" She shook her head. "No, sir." This was more than enough. He placed the plate in the sink, then returned to the counter and watched as she closed her trumpet case gently, checking the latches like someone securing their most precious thing. She stood up, hesitating, not sure whether she should leave or stay a little longer. "It's getting cold out there," the owner said. "Do you have a place to go?" Her fingers froze on the trumpet case handle. She didn't look at him when she answered. "I'll manage." The owner didn't believe that for a second, but he didn't push her into explaining. Sometimes people carry stories that they can't share right away. "Well," he said, "if you ever need to come inside for a few minutes to warm up, you can." This time she looked straight at him. Her eyes were tired, but they held a small spark of relief, like someone experiencing kindness after a long time without it. "I don't want to bother you," she said. "You won't," she nodded slowly, accepting his words, even if she didn't fully trust them yet. Trust wasn't something she could give easily, not after everything she had been through. She walked toward the door, but paused before pushing it open. The cold air from outside brushed against her face, but she didn't step out yet. She turned back to him one last time. "Thank you for listening to me out there," she said. "Most people don't." The owner shrugged gently. It was impossible not to listen. A small laugh escaped her soft, almost shy. Then she stepped outside, the trumpet case tucked under her arm. She looked small against the night sky, but there was something strong about her, too. Something steady dot as she walked down the street. The owner watched from the doorway. She didn't walk fast. She moved with a calm, tired pace, like someone used to long nights. He wondered where she would go. He wondered what she would do next. He wondered what it would take for her life to change. He knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of her story. Not even close. The memory of her music lingered in the air long after she disappeared around the corner. A sound that stayed, even in silence. a sound that carried hope. The owner locked the restaurant door, but kept thinking about her as he turned off the lights. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her past, but he knew her music. And sometimes, music tells you everything you need to know about a person. That night, as he walked home, he found himself humming the tune she had played, trying to capture even a small part of the feeling she had poured into those notes. It wasn't the same, but it reminded him of the moment, a moment that had changed something inside him in a way he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know that this small encounter, this brief moment on a quiet night, would soon grow into something much larger, something that neither of them could predict. And somewhere, walking under the streetlights, the girl held her old trumpet close to her chest, unaware that her life was already beginning to shift, one note at a time. The next afternoon, the restaurant owner found himself replaying the girl's music in his mind. Even while cooking, even while serving customers, even while answering small questions from people who had come for lunch, the tune stayed with him like a soft echo. It wasn't something he tried to remember. It simply refused to leave. He wondered if she would come back. Maybe she had already moved on to another street, another corner, another part of the city. People in hard situations rarely stayed in one place. They learned to keep moving, because staying still sometimes meant trouble. Still, he kept glancing at the door from time to time, almost without realizing it. Outside, the day grew busier. Cars drove past, students walked by, office workers rushed in groups, and the usual city noise filled the air. By evening, when the sky began to turn orange, the rush slowed down, and this owner stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. That was when he heard it, a faint sound of a trumpet coming from somewhere. Down the street. At first, he thought he was imagining it. But the sound grew clearer, fuller, warmer. It was unmistakably her. The same emotion, the same control, the same depth that made people stop without knowing why. He followed the sound with his eyes. And there she was, standing a little farther down from the restaurant. Trumpet lifted to her lips, her eyes closed as she played. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her clothes looked the same as the night before, simple, worn, but clean. She didn't seem to care about her surroundings. The music was everything to her. People slowed down as they passed. Some stopped completely. Some whispered to each other in surprise. Others pulled out their phones, not wanting to miss the moment. A young couple stood still, listening with wide eyes. A man holding a grocery bag paused mid-step. Even two teenagers who had been laughing loudly fell silent as the music reached them. The sound curled around the street, filling the air with something warm and familiar, even for those hearing her for the first time. The restaurant owner watched from the doorway, amazed all over again. Her music wasn't just good. It had a way of slipping past people's barriers, touching something inside them they didn't always talk about. After a few minutes, as she played a more energetic tune, a small crowd gathered. They didn't push or rush. They simply stood there, wrapped in the moment. A few people began recording her with their phones. She didn't notice. She seemed lost in the rhythm, her fingers moving gracefully along the valves. Every note flowed with such emotion that it felt like the street had turned into her stage. The owner looked around and saw how strangers reacted. Some smiled. Some watched quietly. Some looked emotional, as if the music reminded them of someone they missed or something they had forgotten. And slowly, something surprising happened. A person dropped a small bill into her trumpet case. Then another person added a coin. Then another. No one said anything about money. They simply felt moved enough to give. The girl finished her song, lowering the trumpet gently. She looked surprised when she noticed the small pile of coins and bills in her case. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because she wasn't used to people giving so freely. A woman from the crowd stepped forward. "You're amazing," she said. "Do you play somewhere? Or only here?" The girl shook her head shyly. "Just wherever I can." "You should be on a stage," the woman added. "People need to hear you." The girl didn't know what to say. Compliments seemed to make her uncomfortable, not because she didn't appreciate them, but because she wasn't used to receiving them. That another person spoke up. "What's your name?" they asked. She hesitated. "Just call me the girl with the trumpet," she said softly. Some people laughed kindly at her modesty, but not in a mocking way. They liked her sincerity. Someone else added, "I recorded your whole performance. I hope you don't mind. People need to hear this." The girl shook her head. "It's okay." Little did she know those words would matter far more than she realized. The owner approached her slowly, hands in his pockets. She looked up when she saw him, and a small smile appeared, gentle and grateful. "You're back," he said. "I didn't want to bother you," she replied. "So I played a bit farther away." "You're never a bother," he said. "Not with music like that." She lowered her eyes shyly at the compliment, but he noticed the way her shoulders relaxed slightly. She wasn't as tense as she had been the first night. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded softly. "A little." "Come in. I'll make something warm." The crowd slowly dispersed as she followed him toward the restaurant. But even as the people left, they kept glancing back at her. A few continued talking excitedly about her performance. One teenager said, "I'm posting the video right now. People need to see this." Inside the restaurant, the owner prepared a fresh meal. While she waited, she sat at the same spot as the night before, her trumpet case beside her. She touched the instrument gently, wiping the mouthpiece with a soft cloth, like someone caring for their most valuable possession. When he brought her the food, she whispered, "Thank you," again, just as quietly as before. But this time, there was less hesitation in her voice. It felt like she trusted him a little more. As she ate, the owner leaned against the counter. "You drew quite a crowd today," he said. She shrugged slightly. "Sometimes people listen. Sometimes they don't. Today they listened." She nodded. Maybe it was just luck. Luck doesn't make music like that. She paused, her fork frozen mid-air. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. It seemed like she had so much to say, but didn't know how to begin. "Do you always play alone?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yes. No one plays with you? No group or band?" "I used to," she murmured. "A long time ago. What happened?" She went quiet again. Her eyes lowered, and the owner knew she wasn't ready to share. He didn't push. He respected her silence. The girl continued eating while outside. People still talked about her performance. The restaurant's windows weren't thick enough to block out the excited voices. She looked surprised when she realized they were talking about her. The owner tried to make the atmosphere lighter. "Looks like you're famous on this street now," he joked softly. Her cheeks turned a faint shade of pink. "I don't think so. You will be if people keep recording you." She blinked, confused. "Recording me?" "Yeah. A lot of people pulled out their phones." She froze. "I didn't notice. You were focused." She didn't seem sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. She looked worried for a moment, as if the idea of strangers recording her made her uncertain. "Don't worry," the owner said gently. "They recorded you because they were amazed. Not for anything bad." She nodded slowly, trying to accept the idea. After she finished eating, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small handful of coins and bills she had earned from the crowd. She organized them carefully, counting them twice, almost as if she couldn't believe they were really hers. "That's more than I usually get," she whispered. "Because you're talented," the owner said. She glanced up at him, searching his face to see if he truly meant it. When she realized he wasn't just being kind, but honest, her eyes softened. A moment of quiet passed between them again. She gently closed her trumpet case and stood up. "I should go," she said. "It's getting late." "You're welcome here any time," he told her. She smiled again, this time a little wider, and stepped outside. The owner stood in the doorway, watching her walk down the street, just like he had the night before. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way people still whispered about her performance. Maybe it was the video that had already started making its way online. Maybe it was the feeling that the world had finally noticed her, just a glimpse, but enough to spark something new. As she disappeared around the corner, the owner realized this wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of something bigger, something none of them could fully see yet, but it was coming, and it was coming fast. He sat alone in his small room that night, the soft light from the window falling across the keyboard he kept on the table. The room was quiet, except for the faint noise of cars passing outside. He kept replaying the moment when the audience gasped. He had felt something shift inside him, something he had not felt in a long time. It was the feeling of being seen. Not judged, not underestimated, but seen for what he could actually do. And that feeling stayed with him, almost like a warm echo running through his chest. But as that feeling grew, so did another fear. He wondered if the moment earlier was just luck, or maybe he had surprised them only because they didn't expect anything from him. He didn't want this to be a one-time thing. He didn't want the world to remember him only because they were shocked once. He wanted to prove that he wasn't just someone who came from the streets, or someone looked at with pity. He wanted to prove he deserved to be on that stage, just as much as anyone else. He sat on the small stool and gently touched the keyboard keys. He closed his eyes and tried to play the first tune that came to him, but his fingers hesitated. The confidence from earlier was fading and turning into doubt. He took a deep breath and tried again, letting his fingers move with the emotions he couldn't put into words. The sound was soft, almost shaky at first, but slowly it grew steadier. Each note seemed to speak for him in a way he couldn't speak for himself. He remembered the faces in the crowd, especially the older woman who had tears in her eyes. She didn't cry because she felt sorry for him, he could tell. She cried because the music had reached her. That memory made his hands steadier. He kept playing, letting the melody turn into something fuller, something warmer. It was the kind of tune that carried a story without needing any words. Meanwhile, the small room across the hall belonged to the elderly neighbor, who had known him since he first moved into the worn-down building. She had always supported him quietly, without asking anything in return. When she heard the music flowing through the thin walls, she paused from her evening tea and smiled gently. She knew the boy had talent anyone with ears could tell, but today the music felt different. It carried a sense of determination she hadn't heard before. She walked to his door and knocked softly. He stopped playing and turned, surprised to see her. She stepped inside and said in her calm voice, "Your heart is louder than your hands tonight." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply smiled. She placed a small wrapped package on the table. "I saved this for you," she said. "I think you'll need it." He opened it carefully and found new earphones, the kind musicians used to practice without distraction. He looked up at her, wondering how she knew exactly what he needed. She simply smiled and said, "When someone carries talent like yours, even the walls can hear it." Her words meant more to him than she probably knew. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder that even when he doubted himself, someone believed in him. After she left, he put on the earphones and tried again. This time the notes sounded clearer, sharper, and more alive. He practiced late into the night, refining each part of the melody he had begun earlier. He made small changes, smoothing the rough spots and adding touches of emotion where he felt something still missing. By the time he stopped, the sky outside had already started to lighten a little. He hadn't realized hours had passed. The next morning, he headed to his part-time job at the cafe. It wasn't a glamorous job, mostly clearing tables and sweeping the floor, but he didn't mind. It was honest work, and it kept him going. The manager, a calm and observant man, had also seen the viral clip of the street kid performing. He recognized him immediately, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he just watched him quietly as he worked, noticing the way the boy carried himself that day, more focused, yet thoughtful. During lunch break, the manager approached him and simply asked, "You practicing for something big?" The boy froze for a second, unsure of how to answer. He didn't want to sound proud, but he didn't want to hide either. So he nodded and replied, "I'm trying to get better. I don't want what happened the other day to be the only good thing I ever do." The manager gave a small smile and said, "That's how real musicians think." Those words echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. It was strange to hear himself being referred to as a real musician. Nobody had ever said that to him before. People called him many things: kid, helper, street boy, but never that. And hearing it made something shift inside him again, this time in a way that felt steady rather than fragile. When he went back home after work, he pulled out his keyboard again. He wasn't tired. Instead, he felt a quiet energy pushing him to keep going. He replayed the old clips he had saved from musicians he admired, watching the way their fingers moved, the way their faces changed with each emotion. He studied everything like he was preparing for an exam, except this one mattered more than anything he had ever done. As the days moved forward, he settled into a routine: work, practice, sleep, and repeat. But something strange started happening. Each time he played, the kids from the building gathered near his door, sitting on the floor or leaning against the wall. They didn't say anything. They just listened. Sometimes he would open the door and find them sitting there with wide eyes and soft smiles. He didn't chase them away. Their presence actually comforted him. It made the tiny hallway feel like a mini concert space. One evening, a little girl from the building shyly asked him, "Can you teach me just a small part?" He hesitated at first, unsure if he was good enough to teach anyone. But the hope in her eyes reminded him of how he once looked at musicians he admired. He nodded, moved his keyboard to the hallway, and showed her how to press a few simple notes. The other kids watched quietly, some trying to follow along with imaginary keyboards on their laps. This small moment filled him with a kind of joy he hadn't felt before. Teaching them felt as meaningful as playing. He realized that music had given him a chance, not just to be noticed, but to give something back. And that thought stayed with him. Late that night, after the kids had gone home and the hall was quiet again, he sat alone with the keyboard. The melody he had been working on was now almost complete. It felt alive, like it carried not only his story, but the stories of the people who had quietly supported him. He played it slowly, letting each note rise and fall with care. He didn't know what the future would bring, whether he would get another chance on stage, or whether anyone beyond his neighborhood would ever hear this new piece. But for the first time, he wasn't scared, because he understood now that music wasn't about fame or proving something to the world. It was about being honest with his heart and sharing that honesty with whoever was willing to listen. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the last note fade into the silence of the night. It was peaceful. It was real. And it was his. The morning of the event arrived quietly, without any dramatic sunrise or loud excitement. It was one of those calm mornings where the air felt cool and the streets still looked half asleep. He woke up earlier than usual, not because someone called him or because he had work, but because his heart simply wouldn't let him sleep. Today was the day he had been invited back to perform again, This time, not as a surprise, not as a joke, and not as someone the audience underestimated. This time, he had been asked to perform because they believed in what he could do. He sat at the edge of his bed and stared at his keyboard for a while. It looked almost ordinary, a bit old, with a tiny crack on one corner, but it meant everything to him. He ran his fingers across the keys gently, as if reminding himself that all of this had started from here, from this small, second-hand instrument in a cramped room with thin walls. He took a deep breath and whispered softly, "Let's do this." After washing up and getting ready, he stepped out into the hallway. The door across from his room opened at the same time, and the elderly neighbor peeked out with a warm smile. She held a small cloth bag in her hand. She had expected him to leave early. "I packed something for you," she said, placing the bag in his hands. "It's just some fruit and bread. You shouldn't perform on an empty stomach." Her kindness touched him more than he could express. He thanked her quietly. She gently patted his arm and added, "No matter how today goes, remember that music always begins in the heart. Play from there." Her words gave him strength. He headed out of the building, carrying the bag and his old keyboard case. The streets were slowly getting busier. Vendors were prepping their stalls, kids were walking to school, and the usual morning chatter filled the air. But despite the noise, he felt oddly calm inside. When he reached the event hall, he paused outside for a moment. The same place where people had once laughed at him was now the place welcoming him back. He walked in and noticed the staff buzzing around, adjusting lights and checking sound equipment. The atmosphere was different from last time, much more respectful, almost gentle. No one looked at him like he didn't belong. No one smirked. Instead, a few even greeted him politely. The manager from his cafe job appeared suddenly, carrying a clipboard. He wasn't working there today, but had volunteered to help with the event. He walked up and said, "Big day?" The boy nodded with a nervous smile. The manager looked at him with an encouraging expression. "Good, you earned it." He guided him backstage, where other performers were warming up. Some had fancy instruments, some had expensive clothes, and some had parents fussing over them. He felt a small wave of insecurity rise inside him, a voice whispering that he wasn't like them, that he didn't fit. But he quickly pushed the thought away. He had come here because he had something real to share, something that didn't depend on money or appearance. He placed his keyboard on a small table and plugged in the earphones the elderly neighbor had given him. He went through the melody he had crafted over the past nights. It flowed smoothly now. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel shaky. It was honest. And that honesty gave him courage. As he practiced, a young stage assistant approached him. "We're almost ready," the assistant said. "You're second in the lineup." The boy nodded, feeling his heartbeat quicken slightly. Soon, he heard the applause from the main hall as the first performer finished. The assistant signaled him to follow. They walked through the short backstage corridor until they reached the curtains. He heard the announcer introduce him, not as the street boy or the kid who shocked everyone, but simply as someone whose performance had touched many hearts. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights hit him, warm and bright. The hall was full more than last time. People from different ages sat in their seats, talking softly. When they saw him, the room quieted. There was no laughter, only curious eyes watching him. He walked to the center, set his keyboard on the stand, and took a steady breath. He looked around once more. The faces didn't intimidate him anymore. They didn't scare him. They simply reminded him of why he was here. He placed his fingers on the keys and let the first note float into the air. The melody began softly, like a whisper from deep inside him. The crowd leaned in, as if the room itself wanted to listen closely. Every small detail he had practiced during those long nights came back to him naturally. He didn't have to think anymore. His hands knew the story. His heart carried the rest out as the music grew warmer and richer. He felt the emotions rise through him, not the fear or doubt, but the memories that shaped him. He thought of the nights practicing alone, the kids sitting in the hallway, the neighbors' kindness, the cafe manager's quiet encouragement, and even the earlier moment when the audience had first laughed at him. Every part of his journey seemed to flow into the notes. There was a section in the middle of the piece where the melody dipped into something soft and thoughtful. When he reached that part, he felt a lump in his throat. That section had always reminded him of all the times he had wondered if he belonged in this world of music. But instead of letting the feeling overwhelm him, he turned it into sound. The soft, trembling notes carried a kind of vulnerability that the room felt deeply. Then came the final part of the piece, the part he had worked on until dawn one night. It was a rising melody, hopeful, almost like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. As he played it, something inside him opened. The room seemed to brighten. People leaned in even more when the last note faded. The hall stayed silent for a moment, not out of confusion, but because they were absorbing it. That short silence was more powerful than any applause could ever be. Then, slowly at first, the applause began, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire space. He lifted his hands from the keyboard, feeling a soft rush of relief. The applause washed over him, but he didn't get lost in it. He simply stood there with a small, grateful smile. He wasn't overwhelmed this time. He wasn't shocked. He felt grounded, steady, and full of something warm, almost like pride, but not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes from knowing you gave your whole heart. After he stepped off the stage, people backstage congratulated him. Some told him they had been moved. Some said they didn't expect so much depth from someone his age. Others said they felt his story through the music, even though he didn't say a single word. He thanked each one of them humbly, feeling a gentle glow inside. When he finally returned home that evening, the kids from the hallway were waiting for him. They didn't shout or crowd him. They just looked at him with excitement in their eyes. One of them asked softly, "Was it good?" He laughed lightly and said, "It felt right." The elderly neighbor stepped out of her room and clapped her hands softly. "Your music came back through the walls today," she said, smiling, "even from so far away." He didn't know how she always sensed things, but she always did. He walked over and gave her a grateful hug, a simple gesture that said everything he couldn't put into words. That night, when he sat alone with his keyboard again, he didn't feel the pressure he used to feel. He didn't feel the urge to prove anything. He simply played a soft, gentle tune, letting the keys guide him. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for applause. It was for himself. He realized something important. The world might forget many things. Trends come and go. People move on. But the moments he lived, the people who stood by him, and the music that came from his heart, those would stay. Not because they were perfect, but because they were true. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the simple melody drift into the night. And for the first time in a long time, he felt completely at peace with his journey. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He would keep playing, and whatever came next, he would meet it with music.